So, you have an NCA conference paper for me. Yes, sir, I do. It's an entry for the Applied Communication Division, and it focuses on student attitudes of employment interviews. Student attitudes of employment interviews? That seems to be a subject matter that is studied ad nauseum in the literature. Are you sure you can bring anything new to the literature? Actually, when doing a literature review about employment interviewing, you'll find that much of the research focuses on the validity of the interview techniques, and communication processes. This study examines the employment interview from the perspective of interviewee attitude with 3 research questions. First, what opinions do students have about the interview process? Second, do student attitudes toward employment interviews vary based on their majors? And third, are student attitudes toward employment interviews moderated by interaction with the Career Services Office? So you are studying college students, the population that is arguably the most studied population in the history of academia, and you believe that you have a unique entry into the literature. Yes, sir, I do. We received 336 usable responses and conducted a confirmatory factorial analysis and an ANOVA significance test. Wait, you said we received 336 usable responses. Does this mean you have a co-author on this study? Why, yes, there is a co-author on this study. Wow. Can you go back to the beginning of this entire project and help me see the big picture? Absolutely, sir. Let's travel back to the year 2016 to a medium-sized public institution in the Midwestern United States where a highly motivated undergraduate student scheduled an appointment with the Director of Career Services to discuss her observations when speaking with her friends about employment interviews.
We are traveling back to 2016.
So, you have an undergraduate independent study idea for me.
Yes, sir, I do. When I speak with my friends about employment interviews, I see different reactions between my friends in business and my friends in nursing. Everyone in business seems excited to have an employment interview, whereas my friends in nursing seem to dread having one. Does Career Services have any information about how a student's major might influence their opinion on employment interviews?
That's an interesting question. I know there's plenty of research on employment interviews, but most of it comes from the standpoint of the interviewer rather than the interviewee. I can think of no study to date that has looked at student attitudes of an employment interview. Let's brainstorm. What do we know about the topic so far?
In a macro level review of the research, RV and Campion 1982 focused on 3 categories of research in their survey: reliability and validity, research methods and design, and decision making. From the reliability and validity standpoint, their review determined that the interview panels using multiple interviewers were more reliable than panels using limited numbers. For research design, using actual interviewers and interviewees yielded greater validity than reading hypothetical situations with no human interaction. Finally, their review in the area of decision making identified relevant factors in the employment interview process: rating errors, interviewer training, demographic variables, nonverbal behavior, interviewee variables, perceptions of the interviewer, and interviewee training.
Yeah, that's right. And then Harris, 1989, built upon RV and Campion, 1982, by demonstrating that employment interviewing research showed moderate validity as a selection tool. But they also identified several factors that impacted interviewing results. The sex and age of the applicant impacted interviewer impressions. Characteristics of the interviewer, such as age, training received, biases, and behavior, influence the interviewee's perceptions of the position or the organization. And on-campus interviews were actually problematic for accurate employee selection in terms of person organization and person job fit.
Exactly, and then everyone had to wait 11 years until 2000 when Judge and colleagues offered the first comprehensive review of employment interview literature since Harris in 1989. Judge and colleagues further explored the traditional areas of validity and age, race, gender, disability discrimination, as well as the effects of interviews on job candidates. For those effects, Judge and colleagues summarized the growing body of research from an applicant's perspective, noting that it had thus far been isolated to impressions of organizational entry, individual recruiter behaviors, and impressions upon the applicant, and how the process impacted opinions of individual organizations. They did not identify studies where the job seeker's perspective of the employment interview as a general employment seeking process was measured.
That's a great point because Postuma and colleagues 2002 then revealed 278 studies and organized research into 5 categories to examine historical trends and identify gaps within the literature: social factors, cognitive factors, individual difference factors, measures, and outcome. I think you found a gap. So what do we know about college students and employment interviews?
Not much in the literature so far. One of the earliest mentions of college student perceptions of the employment interview was Schmidt and Coyle, 1976, who found that this group's impressions of an organization and likelihood to accept a job offer were dependent upon perceived interviewer personality and the perceived satisfaction with the interview process. This idea was replicated and expanded by Linden and Parsons in 1986, when in a field test demonstrating that young job applicants were more likely to accept a job offer and speak positively about an organization if they felt a personal connection with their specific interviewer.
That's only a couple studies. Surely there must be more.
In a study that focused exclusively on college campus interviews, Stevens in 1997 concluded that applicants' pre-interview beliefs about the likelihood of obtaining a job offer affected their interview behavior and post-interview opinions. Additionally, she found that perceptions of individual recruiters mediated the pre- and post-interview beliefs of the college student interviewees. These results align with a wider pool of employment interview literature. However, all reference studies have identified employment interviews with specific opportunities or organizational recruiters. The studies did not measure the macro ideation of the pre-employment interview process as a whole.
Macro-level studies of employment interviews seem few and far between, and there seems to be nothing exploring how a student's major may influence his or her feelings toward the interview process. Plus, I'm a career services director, and there was also that study by Hansen and colleagues in 2009 that focused on how university career offices measured to what degree programming can boost confidence and performance of job seekers when they interview. So maybe we can work together and explore this topic.
That's a great idea. I'll register for an independent study with my undergraduate department chair in management in order to explore a mutual data set with independent sample t-tests.
And I'm a part-time PhD student in communication. I'll work the data in SPSS and perform a factorial analysis with ANOVA testing. As 2 junior researchers starting off our research careers, I'm sure that nothing will go wrong with our experimental design.
Absolutely. We can design our questionnaire in Survey Gizmo, and then I'll post the link in my social media groups, and you can distribute it via career services emails to our target population. But isn't it going to be difficult to come up with a questionnaire that is both reliable and valid for this topic?
Actually, it's going to be super easy, barely an inconvenience. For our questionnaire, there's a survey by 3 researchers from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, who developed a 25-item questionnaire capturing opinions for employment testing. With their permission, we can modify their questionnaire for employment interviews.
I'll email Lounsbury, Boro, and Jensen for permission to modify their 1989 questionnaire, which they carefully designed based on the literature review of similar studies and vetted with a pilot study to refine the wording of the items.
Oh, receiving permission from authors to use their validated scales and follow-on studies is tight.
It sure is. Lounsbury and his colleagues responded quickly to my request and were happy that we wanted to continue their line of research.
But wait! Harris 1989 concluded that the research subjects mattered, as college students might not be generalizable to the interviewer population at large. Won't this be a huge confound in our data?
This won't be a problem at all, since no literature exists measuring the opinions of these students toward employment interviews, the decision was made to focus on business and health students. We are intentionally selecting to study the student population for this project.
Wow, 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 wow. We are definitely going to have lots of immediate success on this project.
We sure are.
We now return to 2020.
That was 4 years ago. Why are you just now getting around to presenting this work at an academic conference? That's a great question, sir. You see, while we had 336 usable responses, the results weren't what we expected. Oh, you mean 2 relatively inexperienced researchers conducting their first academic research project made a few mistakes and struggled to interpret results? We did, sir. We designed the original study as a descriptive survey meant to capture the feelings at that point in time. We did not declare any formal hypotheses at the start of the survey, such as predicting major and interactions with the career office would influence students' opinions toward employment interviews. Instead, we collected data, performed our statistical tests, and spent a few years reflecting upon our results. We found that our observation regarding student major determining attitudes towards employment interviews was not significant. But we unexpectedly found that gender greatly determined attitudes. This finding was not something either of us expected at the time. So what have the two of you been doing since 2016 to enlighten yourselves and reflect upon these data?
I graduated with my Bachelor of Business Administration from Saginaw Valley State University in Business Management. I then completed an MBA at Bowling Green State University in 2018. I am now a PhD student in the Organizations and Strategic Management program at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
And I completed my PhD coursework and was recalled to active duty in 2018 for 3 years as a military officer to teach English at the United States Naval Academy. Since arriving to the Naval Academy, I've had conversations with my colleagues who specialize in critical theories, as well as those who specialize in gender and race studies, to make sense of our findings. Well, the two of you certainly seem dedicated to this line of research. What else did you find in your study?
At less than a 0.01 significance level, females felt more nervous for interviews than males did, and felt worse if they got a job they could not do well than males did. Females also thought that a desire to do a good job can't be measured by interviews more so than males, so this shows that attitudes towards employment interviews is moderated by gender.
Oh my! Were there other significant moderators? We found that race was significant at 0.05 level for several questions, but we proceed with caution here, as only 17% of our 336 participants were non-white. The data could be skewed and should be adjusted for our next study. But we did find that non-white participants thought interviews gave a good chance to show their capability of the job, and that interviews cut down on favoritism more so than the white participants did. These were surprising results, but it is understandable that a person would think that if they could talk to their potential employer, they may have a better chance at getting a job offer, since the interview is the final step in the hiring process, and the person would have passed the resume review by that point. So now what?
We realized that there were plenty of limitations for this data collection, but that's because it's a preliminary survey. Since there hasn't been research of student attitudes towards employment interviews, we had to create some. Now we can form some hypotheses to do some follow-up research.
Oh, really? Do you have an idea for future hypothesis testing? Oh, yes. We plan to dig into the emotions factor. We will study how self-esteem and nervousness varies by gender for employment interviews, suspecting that females experience lower self-esteem and higher nervousness during interviews. We also suspect social dominance theory is the reason behind these gender differences. Oh my goodness! Do you think any findings will be different from your original data set?
We suspect that when we redistribute the survey items not loaded on the fairness factor will have stronger agreement, particularly because of the change in political environment. Our first survey was collected during the last year of Barack Obama's presidency, while the next survey will be collected after or during Trump's presidency and the Black Lives Matter movement that has caught incredible motivation since. So, survey questions regarding discrimination and interview fairness will catch a lot more political relevance than they did back in 2016.
Wow, 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 wow. This is going to be an awesome next step, and I wish you all the best as you stay with this line of research in the future.